we're going through 16 horoscopes in 4 different ways, and then we're going to try synthesizing everything together. We finished the outward personalities, and now we're doing the emotionalities. And each time that we do this in the oral part of this, which parallels the little written briefs, we're trying to do something that is a sideline interest, some kind of a classic. And in this case, let's do a study of interest in the character of Helen Keller. Now, my dictionary defines interest as a feeling which causes attention to a special object or set of objects, which is precisely the way that Christian mysticism defines interest. In fact, it says that interest is one of the 2 basic feelings, interest and indifference. So this fits in, the English language fits in perfectly with the way the desire world is described. The moon and Cancer are said to be the astrological significators of interest. And if you look at the emotionality fact sheet that we just passed out, you can see in there that the moon is not especially strong. It's the number 6 planet, and it's just a little bit below average. With the Sun and Venus in Cancer, Cancer is moderately active, and that increases the influence of the moon. Now, in astrology, in the signs, the 2 basic states of potential, time and space, are in an active sense indicated by Capricorn. That is, time as an active potential is ruled by Capricorn, and space as a moving, living potential is ruled by Cancer. The active space that is Cancer is likened in human terms to a womb. And for many, many centuries, mystics of all ages have talked about cosmic space as a womb. And a womb is the place where pregnancy takes place. And pregnancy means filled with possibilities. So another way of looking at space, at interest, is as caring. Caring about an object with active attention. And that caring with active attention nurtures the attention of the object, or toward the object within the subject. So the person who is interested is waking up a caring attention. So we can see that interest or caring is an inward thing. It's within the subject relative to the object. And in such a way, the interest is an impulse to move the subject to action with relation to the object. It is interest or caring is the parturition of motivation or of stimulation. This is exactly what mysticism says. It gives birth to motivation or stimulation. Now, the moon in Pisces and the sun in Cancer are both highly retreative. And the 4th and 8th houses in which they are located, respectively, are also retreative. And in this regard, the fourth house is like a womb of personal subconsciousness, where one gestates the things of personal psychology, impressions, memories, especially traumatic memories, associations, habitual responses, hang-ups, psychological constellations, complexes. All of those things are gestated in the womb of subconscious that is indicated by the fourth house. So it is obviously a much more expanded womb as life carries on, because we have more and more memories, and we have more and more psychological content. In one way, this is why it's difficult to work with a little child's horoscope, because there is no content yet. You can't see where the traction is, in which direction it's going. There's always that great danger of front-loading and leading the consciousness of the parents to think that a child is going to be a certain way and having too much influence in their life. This is true throughout life, that we have more and more and more impressions in our personal subconscious. Unless we learn how to purge it through something like retrospection, for some people it's confession, for other people it's psychoanalysis, or other things that purge the subconscious from all of those things that lurk in it. Fortunately, self-consciousness and willpower also grow throughout life. If it didn't, the subconscious would seem to well up and overtake us. We would be overcome by our past history. Moreover, the older a person gets, the more a person remembers. And the more a person reminisces and sees connections between past events, the more the subconscious gets purged. So it isn't an increasingly growing thing all the time. As we are looking at it, and there are other ways to look at it, the eighth house indicates opportunities to turn inward with a sense of intrigue, or with a sense of mystery, or of solving secrets, or probing the mysteries of the universe. Cancer in the eighth house would indicate a kind of brooding over interests. With the sun involved, it is a deliberate and self-conscious activity. So from this we can fairly easily say that deaf-blindness in her has produced an enforced introversion. And that, in turn, has produced the culturing of emotional and motivational self-observation. It looks like that's one of the intents of this life, to force her to turn inward and to self-consciously see herself in an inward sense. So her feeling nature is twofold. First, there is the active interest of how she feels things and is interested in them. Then there are the actual things in which she's interested. In one way, she's interested in the process of interest, and she's interested in the things to which the process is applied. This is all indicated by the watery eighth sign Scorpio rising. Mars is co-ruler of Scorpio, and it's very strong in the horoscope, and it is in the Jupiterian ninth house. And It forms the strongest aspect in the horoscope, the fiery trine to the expansive Jupiter. From all of this relative to the external world, she's very, very interested in all kinds of things. She has an extremely broad interest. Modern mystics, such as Rudolf Steiner most notably, claim that there is a direct correlation between interest and light in the desire body. Someone who is very self-conscious with regard to interest and has a very high interest quotient is somebody that has an extremely bright aura. They're interested in everything, and they're avidly interested in everything. And that sort of describes Helen Keller, at least with regard to the ascendant. There are other meanings and other ramifications to having a bright aura, but this is the only one that's really germane to what we're looking at right now. So this curious interest and this intense passion for solving the mysteries of things of the external world is certainly described by the ascendant and by Mars. The inner light is very much indicated by the Jupiter trine Mars. It reflects into that from the interest in things in the outer world. So the Jupiter trine Mars is surely very optimistic, very enthusiastic, and even zealous with positive attitudes. If ever anybody was optimistic, this is the person. Huh? Yes, you're anticipating. Huh? The women always know what I'm saying next. They're used to my lines by now already. So, this all says that externals brighten her internal atmosphere, which in turn integrates and instigates new interest. So there's like this whole situation that we're trying to describe here in a rather nebulous way is like a widening spiral of interest and a widening spiral of positive attitude about the external world. The whole business is not completely fluent because, as we remember from the personality study, Pluto is opposite the ascendant and its co-ruler, so there is some limitation and there is some consequent frustration. With regard to what we're discussing right now, it is probably a frustration with the limitations of things signified by Earth, the Earth sign. That is, the limitations of tactile and sensory experience. Obviously, she would love, with the Jupiter trine Mars from the ninth house, she would love to have the senses that work at a distance, where you can hear things from miles away or see stars that are millions of miles away. So her interests are much more broad, and even in their broadness more intense than the dull tactile sensation allows for, even though she develops tactile sensation to an extremely high degree. Nonetheless, she gets a lot of mileage out of them. Because of these frustrating perceptual limitations, her consciousness has to be more on inward facets of experience than it is in the normal person. She's really shut down externally. In the desire world and in the desire body, it means, in her case, much of her attention is given to the impressions of external and emotions. So, if she has something external occur to her, or she feels emotions from someone else, that is where she gives her attention rather than to many of the outer things that we give our attention to. In her case, it isn't so much an immediate reacting to external stimulus, because everything has to go very slow for her. If you think about it, reading Braille, even for a fast Braille reader, is a really slow process. There are no speed Braille readers. It's very much a speedy thing. Also, she did not have the enormous amount of sensory information inundating her and drowning her attention. So she had precious little input. And having that little input from the external world and being in an isolated state allowed for the formation of very good, discrete impressions of the things that she did experience. Even so, because our desire nature is very young in its development, it requires quite a bit of sensitivity and quite a bit of self-control in order to focus on impressions. Usually the only people who focus on impressions are artists, and sometimes psychic sensitives. But most people don't focus on impressions. In the desire world, one of the sub-regions is called the region of impressionability. And the region of impressionability is where the twin forces of attraction and repulsion completely balance each other. Now, as I understand it, I take that to mean that there is enough attraction to form an impression around a perception, and not so much as to generate a global philanthropy or something like that with its extreme motivation, but enough to attract things and compose things together, enough attraction to do that. And there's enough repulsion to limit the attractive force so that it doesn't motivate in other directions. But there's not so much repulsion as to disintegrate the form, which is one of the chief positive things that repulsion does in the desire world. It disintegrates desire forms that are no longer necessary. And anybody who's ever gone through a bummer knows that there are some ugly forms in the desire world that need to be disintegrated. I'll never forget, a friend told me about an experience that he had under an LSD trip where he was seeing the lower desire world. He didn't know what it meant, and I don't know what it meant. He saw this funny horse, and out of the side of the horse, suddenly arms started coming out, and they went up the back spine of the horse, and they the fingers stuck themselves into it, and the horse pulled itself apart with arms that came. Probably had something to do with self-destructive aspirations or something like that, but I don't know. So this describes not only the region of impressionability, but it describes her entire life. She is attracted to things enough to draw together or to compose an impression, but not so much that she can take action. She has a lot of emotional sensitivity to work with impressions. The moon is in Pisces, which is surely a sign of emotional sensitivity and delicacy and all of those things. And the moon forms a sextile as its only aspect with Neptune, which is the ruler of Pisces. It's a modest strength aspect, but the redundancy of it does indicate a strengthening of its effectiveness in the whole personality. This is another sideline, but sometimes with regard to our evolution, it's easier to develop with medium strength aspects to octaves, because very intense octave aspects usually are associated with prodigious specializations, and they don't allow a general development. There's no leeway there. And weak aspects, the octaves, are so faint that you can't even get in touch with them often. The very universal things that the octaves are meant to point to have difficulties with particulars, and especially with specialization. Therefore, the octaves, I think, do much better in a chart where there is not a really strong pulse aspect or orb aspect. Yep.
Just curious. The fact, you comment on some of it in the sheet here, but it wasn't quite as obvious till I looked at. When the moon is, whether it's in its own sign or not, because it deals so much with Earth, and when it is in the 4th house, is it usually more powerful there than any place else?
No, the moon is, like every other planet, is powerful, proportional to its intense aspects. That's the biggest factor. The aspects in terms of usable astrology are the strongest factor. It's starting to dawn on you now of all the different things that comprise the relative strength or weakness of a planet. And the fact that it is an abstract ruler of the 4th house does increase its strength, but it's not a big factor. It's an abstract ruler, and it's much more influential where it is a direct ruler in the 8th house.
Okay. Now, with the fact that Neptune was in the 6th house, and as I recall,
that's an abstract detriment.
That's an abstract detriment, and it also deals with health as such. Does it? The 6th house, does it not?
It can.
That's why I was wondering if it dealt so much with the sensitivities, the physical sensitivities.
No, we looked at a number of other things. We did a whole study on the destiny of blindness when we looked at the personality study. And with the sensory limitations, we noted a lot of other things that were much more influential than Neptune being in the 6th house. What you're talking about in relation to the macrocosm, Neptune in Virgo, which is the macrocosmic version of Neptune in the 6th house, does have to do with toleration of labor. And it's a fact that all over the world where people are put to labor, it's difficult to bear. And so many people who are doing heavy labor jobs are people who take drugs. And Neptune, there is a relationship between Neptune having its detriment in Virgo and the fact that it becomes a very negative thing as far as the labor force is concerned. I think at one time before the revolution in China, I think maybe 2/3 of all laborers smoked opium. And that was their way of escaping a life of poverty and very hard work. All right.
Richard, so you said that the moon is more influential indirectly on the 8th house than the 4th? I just wondered why.
No, the increase of strength in the moon in its influence is stronger from rulership than it is from an abstract rulership in the 4th house.
Just in her chart.
What?
Just in her chart.
No, in all charts. Yeah. An abstract rulership is not worth a lot. At least that's my finding.
I still understand why.
Well, in this case, the fourth house is ruled by Neptune.
Yeah.
And Neptune, for its rulership of the fourth house, gets an increase in strength. The moon gets an increase in strength for being an abstract ruler of the fourth house, but not very much increase.
Okay.
Not as much as Neptune gets for being the ruler of it, or that the moon gets from being the ruler of the eighth house.
I guess it's not totally the rule of the eighth anyway, is it? Because the Gemini is on the cusp
Yeah.
of the eighth.
Yeah, but it's depositing the sun.
Okay.
Which is,
So anyway, that's more important.
Okay.
That helps too.
Okay. Yeah, just keep going till you pin me down. I'm sometimes elusive. All right. The aspect, the sextile between the moon and Neptune, is in negative polarity signs. And negative polarity signs are very good for producing forms. And that's what impressions really are. They are emotional forms that are relative to sense perceptions. There are impressions from other emotions coming from other people, but you're dealing with something much fainter there. The fact that it is a benefic aspect indicates that the learning to work with the impressionability was probably begun in a previous life, that she started working on this before. The fact that it is a second sextile, that is, the moon is behind Neptune rather than in front of it, probably means that she's trying to synthesize and universalize, which goes along with a lot of other things in her character. So she is a broad synthesizer. Now, if all of these surmisals are true, they are important. Because one of the problems with impressions in general, and in this horoscope in particular, is subjectivity. Impressionability is a microcosmic activity, and it's limited only to those beings which have perceptions of the world without, whether it be the physical world or the desire world. There is no such thing as a macrocosmic or a cosmic impressionability. There are large-scale sweeps of emotions, that there are moods. I guess you would call them cosmic moods, that the whole cosmos is in a mood for a long time, but a mood is not the same thing as an impression. There cannot be a cosmic impression because the macrocosm does not have an eyeball out there. This is one of the works of microcosmic beings like you and I. We get the sense perceptions of the external world, and we make impressions of them, and we feed both the perceptions or the essence of the perceptions and the impressions about them inward to the spirit, which is more macrocosmic. On the other hand, the interpretation or the meaning of impressions, when they have been assimilated to parent principles which created things in the first place in the transcendental spiritual worlds, is a macrocosmic activity. That is, the meaning of things is found in the macrocosm, whereas the experience of them is found in the microcosm. The problem here is that when you focus interest and attention on forming or experiencing impressions, the attention is drawn away from universals. It has to be that way. The same thing happens when you're focused on perception. You're all bound up in perception, and except perception is a bit more neutral and objective, and it's not quite so much at the disposal of the lower nature, but you're focused on something very minute, and your attention is taken away from the universal, which means it is taken away from the spirit. That's not to say that it's impossible to self-consciously perceive things with a universal outlook, but most people don't really do that. One of the problems then of Impressionism in the arts is that it is just that. It's subjective. But it also happens to be one of the best things. An artist tries to convey a universal impression common to everyone, but has only mixed success as they can because there's subjectivity. And it depends on how subjective and how personal the artist is. Like I, for example, think that Pontilism is not a good form of Impressionism because I don't experience it that way, even though it was a fascinating thing to do. I see I'm in a topic here. I told you I'm all over the place tonight. I'm in a topic here that everybody is greatly interested in. And next week I'm going to take you down to the Art Institute.
Promise?
This very notion is borne out in the history of art, because things passed from very realistic, objective art to Impressionism, and then from there they moved toward abstraction, which is almost a complete removal from physical objectivity and a tendency to want to go straight to the desire world where the forms are not such definite things as the forms are in this physical world. One part of this problem is that in an unhealthy subjectivism, things are taken personally. And then the impression is not an impression that is a true one that is being fed to the spirit. It's tainted. There is in our nurturative womb where we form the impressions and where we form imaginations, and that where we expand them, there's a tendency to be nutritive and a tendency to be protective. The womb of imagination or impression is like the moon. It's like a mother. It nurtures and it protects what it has imagined. This includes the personal ego, which is functioning in that womb. So we find in people who are highly impressionable, not only are they highly subjective, but very often they become protective and they become defensive. The fourth house is likely to this. Cancer is likely to this. A lot of the aspects that she has are likely to that. Fortunately, she has all positive aspects, which greatly decreases the likelihood to defensiveness. Plus, she has a very expansive Jupiterian, Neptunian quality to it, which also decreases the likelihood to defensiveness. So she is not a highly defensive person. And then if you throw in the fact that Mars is very, very strong, and it has a lot of courage and bravery, there's no need for her to be defensive. And she was, in fact, not highly defensive. She was unusual in that regard compared to most other people who are extremely impressionable. This brings us to another facet of her emotionality. We have seen now that she's quite sensitive and she's quite feelingful. And the redundancy in this part of the emotionality shows these tendencies to be almost undivided. Aspects and sign and house positions all reinforce each other. That kind of redundancy makes for an undivided kind of facet of consciousness. The sign positions, the planets, and especially the house positions show that she's very inward. She's inward, and she would even be inward if she weren't deaf-blind, which only seems to cut off extroversion and make it more difficult. So in a way, she's alone in her own little world with her feelings, but this leads to something that's very fascinating. In the introduction to the emotionality, when we talked about the desire world and the desire body, we saw that there were two flows that the twin forces of attraction and repulsion took. Obviously, they are from within out and from without in. We noted that the character of our intent in applying interest in motivation, how we apply that motivation to one of these streams, the introversive or the extroversive stream, indicates whether the outward flow will be repulsive or attractive. Therefore, if we assert ourselves in the outward flow, in the inward flow, if we assert ourselves selfishly, that causes an outward repulsion. Whereas if we give ourselves in the outward flow to others selflessly, that causes an attraction to us. Now there are almost, that's real simple. That's real obvious. The least little bit of selfishness in anything automatically taints the outward stream, so that it is a matter of mixed attraction and repulsion. We see that all the time. They were attracted to people and were repulsed by them at the same time. Now these are all very simple, obvious things. In life and in astrology, it's a lot more difficult. There are almost endless flavors to the outpouring and the indwelling forces. And there are myriads and myriads of mixtures of attraction and repulsion. We've experienced all kinds of them. I'm beginning to talk like Spanish already. They use a lot less S's than we do in Spanish. I've been working on it sometimes 2 hours a day now. Get sucked into a whole different way of thinking about things. This horoscope is very good for illustrating another feature of these interdependent force flows. This feature is that there's some kind of relationship between the degree of inwardness and the degree of outwardness. If one is psychologically healthy, one deliberately balances attention to introversion and extroversion. One then has a supple kind of emotionality. Carl Jung, who wrote extensively on it, points out that there's a great danger of habitually preferring and emphasizing one or the other, and that people who emphasize or put their attention only on the outgiving or only on the indrawing become very stiff and very brittle personalities. The principle is really simple, that the degree of introversion is matched by the degree of extroversion. This is true whether a person focuses more on one than the other. It's still there. It has to be that way. There can't be that much ingoingness without a corresponding degree of outwardness. It's true whether the whole business is voluntary or involuntary. Anybody who has ever done much inner work that turns in and centers very intensely in something like healing prayer realizes right away that in that very interning there's all kinds of stuff. You know, it's a really intense radiation outward. You don't have to work with prayer or concentration or anything like that very long to find that out. And if it is a positive inward turning, it really is attractive. It attracts all sorts of people. Now, what we've looked at so far in the Helen Keller chart is a little bit of a very sensitive introversion. Part of the introversion is forced by not being able to see or hear. Part of it is volitional. Now let's look at the other direction. Let's look at extroversion. It is obviously, in this case, centered on the very strong Mars, which is the strongest planet in the horoscope, and the very strong trine of Mars to Jupiter, which is the strongest aspect in the horoscope. Moreover, the aspect occurs in fire signs, which tend to be the most extroverted of all the signs, and it occurs in highly expressive houses. Houses of very broad universal expression, the 5th and the 9th houses. Now, what is so impressive about this very strong complementation and the moderately strong inward complementation is that the strength of the introversion is not as great as the strength of the extroversion, which is probably why it had to be enforced, but we'll come back to this in a little bit. As we mentioned before, that impression work is best done with less intensity. For relative beginners to form impressions of things, to be very gentle is much easier to learn impressionability than to try to do it with great intensity. Now, these things are interesting, but they're not what I want to get at. The Moon Pisces Neptune situation is extremely delicate. It's refined. It's almost lacy. Neptune and Pisces, for example, love lace. The Mars, Leo, Jupiter situation is complementary in flavor as well as intensity. It's fierce. It's forceful. It's combative almost to pugnaciousness. The Moon, Pisces, Neptune combination is humble. It's pious. And it's passively receptive. Whereas the Mars, Leo, Jupiter quality is proud, and it's very daring, and it's positively assertive, and it's expansive. The Moon, Pisces, Neptune is indirect. It's demure. It circumlocates. It beats around the bush, and it's retreative. Whereas the Mars, Leo, Jupiter is very direct. It's very confident. It's very brash. It's even bombastically forward. Now, it's important to remember that the horoscope represents the life expression of a creative divinity. Thus, if that being that is creating the life is sufficiently advanced in evolution, advanced enough to be quite awake, the horoscope seems to have more of a plan to it than if it's just merely feedback, or if it's merely created by the agents of destiny and the individual has just walked through it. For this reason, and for others, one life is not just the carrying out of destiny from the immediate preceding life. Much of it is from the life that we just had before this one, but not all of it. Because of our current lack of development and our limitations, we can't experience everything that we set in motion. We are, in fact, cosmic debtors. And usually we have a large load of unredeemed destiny. Whether that destiny is positive or pleasant destiny, or whether it is negative destiny. We have a lot that's unredeemed. We have a lot of good things that could happen to us if we could handle it. It happens in daily life. We can't finish everything we start in any given day, and we can't even finish all the things we carry over from previous days. So sometimes we have catch-up days. And with those catch-up days, we try to reduce the backlog without initiating anything new. Now, we have said that the Mars situation in this chart counterbalances the Moon situation and then some. It goes beyond it. We have speculated that they are intimately linked in the extroversive and introversive vectors of energy. But because they are tied together in the soul nature in this rebirth, doesn't mean that they have a quotaneous origin and development. In this case, it is my thought, it's speculation, that the Mars things are old, and they're responsible for the Scorpio cruelty that we talked about when we talked about the blindness. The blindness that forced the sensory handicap. But it is true that it's associated in that way, but it's also possible that this martial destiny, this martial part of her character, was called up to do just what Roz said, to provide the fortitude and the strength to work through the conditions that were going to be prevalent in this life. All right, let's do our only aspect analysis tonight. Mars square Jupiter. Number one planet.
Mars square Jupiter?
What?
Trine?
Oh, I'm sorry, there's nothing to square there, huh?
Yeah.
All right. 22% of all of the planetary strength lies in Mars. The number one aspect, and it has an approximation number of 85, which is meaningless, but it gets us to 21% of all of the aspect strength. Jupiter is the number 7 planet and has an estimation number 79, and 8% of planetary strength. So Mars is almost 3 times as strong as Jupiter is. So if we look at the structure of the whole setup between these 2 planets and the aspect, or the energy distribution, we have something that's very strong, Mars, working through a tool that is very strong, and working with another force that is modest. is like an extremely strong player with well-developed tools dominating a positive activity. It's a positive activity, but the other player is weak so that the activity can't come to its very best because the other is weak. It's like the early seeds in a tennis tournament or something like that, where the very strong play the very weak. It's a personal life philosophy that's based on action. It's an energy to get things done, the tools to do them, and enough positive attitudes to actually do them. That's sort of what the energy distribution is like. The work is determined by taking keywords from both planets. Some of the keywords for Mars are desire, energy, drive, motivation, pride, challenge, spunkiness. Some of the keywords for Jupiter are expansive, generalizing, optimistic, levity, principles or ideas, inflation, or loftiness. Just putting some of these together, we see that there are intensely optimistic desires, which is exactly what she needed. And it is a drive that has almost universal proportions. And the one keyword shared in common by both planets is pride. Pride in doing, pride from doing, and pride in attitude. So this is a strong pride. It's not a negative pride. It's a self-esteem kind of pride. So this is somebody that's almost cocky about positivity and about self-respect. And somebody that has an abundance of challenging attitudes. Yeah, good idea. All right, let's look at some generals. Let's look at quality. The Mars-Jupiter malefics are bombastic and aggressive and roguish. The malefics often indicate inflated, offensive kind of pride. And what I found in the malefics, I used to hang around just for this very reason. I did a study at one time of pool players and bowlers. And all of the people that were most involved in pool playing and bowling had malefic aspects between Jupiter and Mars. They had that attitude like, I'm going to blow those pins to smithereens. It's that kind of a quality. The benefics, which is what we have here, there's always confidence. And, as we've said, positive pride. And sometimes you can call it encouraging, but sometimes it's almost like a bullying tendency. Like you try to push something along faster than it wants to go. The specific aspect is a trine. And the attitude of this trine, you could probably even hear her say this in her life. It's easy if you only try it. And it's got that kind of positivity. And this trine, when she once did get started, she was unstoppable. So you could say this is an honor roll kind of trine. Looking at relative strengths, let's look at what is not our cases first. If Jupiter is stronger, it is a hoopla aspect. There's all kinds of braggadocio and those kinds of things. And the philosophy is the all, and you do just a little bit of an action to demonstrate that you philosophically knew it was there all along. If there's balancing, or if the two planets are of equal strength in Jupiter-Mars aspects, there is philosophizing in doing and doing in philosophizing. There is sort of a mutual, when there are balanced aspects that involve activity, as Mars planets do, there's something like a reciprocal circularity about them. And in our case, we have the stronger Mars, and that is an indication of almost might makes right. I've got the power, and all I need is enough philosophy to express that power. If we look at the signification, it occurs in fiery signs, which greatly enhances the shared keyword, pride. So there's even more pride because of the fiery sign positioning. And there's even more assertiveness and some more indication to offensiveness.
Well, wouldn't there be a little stronger philosophy than normal because it's also in the ninth house?
Yeah, we're coming to that.
Oh.
It was anticipation, I know.
Save me from asking.
Okay.
It takes place in cardinal and fixed signs, which increases the tendency for it to be the on a roll quality. It's a self-respecting momentum. And the fact that it is Leo and Aries indicate that it is a matter in this aspect of more heat and temperature than it is light. So we see all of these redundancies as you go more and more into the details of the analysis. The aspect becomes very clearly one thing that is not mitigated. If we look at the domification, as Roz did 5 minutes ago, it happens between the 5th and the 9th houses, which indicates that there is a lot of enthusiasm about education. The Mars-Jupiter aspects are enthusiasm signs. And its energetic expression. This is not going to be measured or anything like that. The expression is going to all sound like marches or something like that. There's joy or enjoyment more in the cultural than in the personal. Everything is somewhat vicarious because we're looking at everything being on the west side of the horoscope. So there is more cultural emphasis than there is personal emphasis. We look at the application. It is a mounting enthusiasm because it is an applying trine. And so this is saying that not only is she on a roll and not only does she have momentum, it keeps on increasing. And because of the very proud nature of it, it's something like a trumpet crescendo, where it just builds up and up and up, something like that. It's a first phase aspect, so the pride and the self-esteem is likely to be in accomplishment. And I bet you this is another thing that you can hear her say numerous times in life. I'm doing it. I'm actually doing it. It has that kind of quality to the trine. And it's more of a statement of philosophy.
You run out of paper yet?
What?
Have you run out of paper there yet?
No, we're coming down to the end. It'll be just about 90, probably under 90 minutes. So from all of this, we see that this facet of life, and since it's the strongest facet, is a gusto for life. And it's a life with brio, if you like those kinds of words. These extroversive qualities complement both in quality, the rare sensitivity and impressionability, and go beyond in quantity. So this is a really interesting desire nature, because even though there is a good deal of extroversive assertion, there is not a good deal of repulsion. Scorpio was rising, and so there was some repulsiveness there, and she did fight with people. But this is not a really repulsive character the way that Jay Gould was repulsive. There is personal repulsion when she feels like she's been countermanded in a heavy-handed way, and that repulsion comes from the Pluto opposite the ascendant. And she can be wild and unruly and sassy, even rebellious and belligerent. But it isn't the most dominant part of her character, and then she is not highly offensive. You don't find that in any, even the boldly honest biographies of her. There are two main reasons for this. There may be others, but there are two main reasons, and they both center on the Mars-Jupiter trine. The first is that it is positive. The very nature of that trine and everything about it, there is nothing destructive in it. And there's nothing that is negating of others. If anything, it's a highly encouraging kind of aspect. It tries to buck other people up. The second reason has something to do with intent. Normally, in most human beings, unfortunately, self-assertion is selfish. The example that we used was the dog pulls its dish to itself and it growls and it tries to repulse every other animal, and that's repulsive and it's offensive. Now with Scorpio rising, there is some of that, especially with the cruelty. We talked about that before, the psychological cruelty of Mars square Neptune. We'll come back to that when we get to the spirituality. That had something to do with the blindness. But even though there is cruelty in this chart, it's not excessive. Now my guess about this, or my speculation about this, is that because Scorpio is on both the 12th and first house cusps, it means that it is payback time or retribution time. And the retribution is so strong and dominant that there isn't room for self-assertive destructiveness. When you've been humbled and really humbled hard, it's kind of hard to strike out at someone, and that's what's happening to her. In the same way that Mars and Venus signify the action involved in the twin forces of attraction and repulsion, Jupiter and Saturn indicate the intent of those same forces of attraction and repulsion. Now in this chart, Jupiter is not monstrously strong, but it is the strongest, it's in the strongest positive aspect, and it is a completely benign planet. By contrast, Saturn is the weakest planet in the horoscope, and it has a benefic aspect with Venus. So, even though there is assertion, it is benefic and generous assertion, and there is very, very little, almost an absence of repulsive selfishness. Now, a few minutes ago it was suggested that introversive forces are balanced with extroversive forces. In the desire body, that's necessary because they're both part of the same vector, metaphorically speaking. One may favor or savor or utilize the introversion more than the extroversion, or vice versa, and leave the other one out of control, but the forces are still there. In the same way that it is possible to suck one's gut in and hold it that way for the entire life so that you look good, it's possible to maintain a posture of either introversion or extroversion for an entire life so that it looks good or it feels good to you. But this is a matter of choice. And it's so exclusively that everything is free in it. In individual actions, it must be there, but in general postures, the balance doesn't have to be there. Yes.
Well, you're talking about Saturn. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's me. The Saturn sextile to Venus, and you're talking about Saturn indicating intent.
Yes.
Do we take into account tonight or 10 years from now the Saturn square Mercury? Does that have anything to do with
That's
the
pretty weak.
intent? Or
Very
okay,
weak to almost non-existence.
all right.
All right.
Well, I was just wondering if that had to do with this at all.
Now, as far as we've gone so far, it's clear that the Mars-Jupiter extroversive forces outweigh the introversive forces from the moon Neptune. However, when we bring in the final element of the emotionality, the Venus part of the emotionality, parity is almost perfectly reached. Now, this said, our estimation system is very young in its development, and this way of looking at the emotionality, the desired nature, is very young in its development, and there may be large revisions in both or in either. So we can't speak, like we got lead pipe cinches here. Venus is either the number 2 or the number 3 planet, and so it's reasonably strong. It's in the introversive Cancer and the introversive 8th house. Venus in Cancer is a blending of the two poles of the feminine. Woman as artistifier and socializer, and woman as protector and nurturer. The influences of both the moon and Venus are fluidic. And the combination of Venus having anything to do with the moon, in this case the sign Cancer, is something like oil on water. They're both fluidic, they're both feminine, but they don't mix well. Because of differences in density, the lunar qualities of Cancer are more basic and fundamental. And they support the oil, which is sort of like the social frou-frou or finish that floats on the top. But the oil that floats on the top gives you those lovely diffraction, what do you call them, rainbows, the diffraction rainbows. And so there is something about that, that wouldn't happen without the water being there. So there's something like that is what we're looking at. Venus in this chart is much more conservative than Venus often is. It's modest. And what's the word that they use? Morally proper. There's a right word in there. It's like modest. Prudent? Something.
Reserved?
Yeah, something along that line. And this also complements the boisterousness of Mars in this horoscope. The caring is deeply conservative caring. And this is much enhanced by the fact that Venus is sextile to Saturn. So that shows a very deep, steady, consistent love nature. The Venus-Uranus doesn't necessarily show consistency, but it does show some impersonality. And it shows a caring for others in an impersonal, altruistic-like way. And this is sort of like a relief valve from the pressure that comes from the subjectivism and in the introversion. The Venus, Uranus, at this time I'm running out of time, so notes here are very vague. The Venus sextile Uranus is a relief from the pressure that gets built up by taking things way, way, way too personal. The influence, the Jupiterian influence on Mars is sufficient to point to a philosophy of life, a ninth house philosophy of life. And it is likely to be involved with ethical concerns, including the fairness of political philosophy. She was a socialist. And so the Mars then is not a sports Mars or an engineering Mars or more purely martial in those senses. It's a philosophical Mars and it's a political Mars. Now we can see something similar with the Venus. It is spontaneously creative from the sextile to Uranus. And the other non-social characteristics of Venus are also more cultural. And again, this is backed up by all the planets being in the West. And we can see that the whole emotionality in this person is cultural, and it's not personal, which again takes her away from being too subjective. To just sum it in general, we can see that in this chart, relative to the personality, the emotionality is very strong. And relative to the mentality, the emotionality is very much stronger. The emotionality is balanced between very delicate and very prudent impressionability and creative feelings, along with very eager and plain and straightforward enthusiasm. Hers is an emotionality that is being cultured to and is well suited for society and culture. She has very little selfishness, and she attracts by altruistic, philosophical, and philanthropic intent. She has forced introversion, but she still wants to be giving. She feels she can give and do that on an inner way. She was a Swedenborgian, and we'll talk about that when we get to spirituality.
Question.
Yes.
So I was just going to ask about the fact that since Mars was so strong in the ninth house, which is usually deals with the religion and or your faith or whatever belief system that you have. Mars being a personal type planet, that would indicate a lot of belief in self and what you can do.
Yes. Basically what I think it is that for her, philosophy has to lead to action. And that the action has to be for the good, and that the good is discovered in the action.
Yeah, and the fact that it's so extroverted, it was kind of like, if I can do it, anybody can do it.
Yes. Yes. I think that there's very clearly a role model characteristic here. Not a 10th house role model, but a 9th house role model, an amateur, something that is done for the love rather than standing out there as some popular icon or something like that.
But obviously affects the 10th house.
Yeah.
Because of the Virgo on it, the service, and then Uranus, it's kind of revolutionary. So I think I need to read more of her.
Yeah, she has.
I wonder how much healing she got.
She has an autobiography, as well as several. There are several very good biographies on her. That's it, unless there are more questions.
I wanted you to say a little more about Venus and the Moon. You said it was like oil and water. Yes. I don't know. Could you maybe just talk about it a little bit?
It's a very
or why? I always thought it went together.
You can slip on water and you can slip on oil, but if you slip on water and oil, it's much easier to slip, because one acts as a slip for the other, and there's that differential. So there's something, the emotionality of Venus being mixed together with the moon, or Venus in watery signs, especially Cancer, is very fluent. It has low traction or low friction to it.
So Venus would be the oil.
Yeah, Venus is the oil.
So you said something about like there'd be two roles, like that Venus in Cancer would have like two roles or something.
No, there are, in the feminine there are two roles. There is woman as mother, which is the moon, and that is nurturing, and that is protective, that is educating, that is gestating and fostering. And there is Venus as planet of love, or woman as planet of love, which is the lover, but it's also the artist, and it's the social person. And when you have Venus in Cancer, you see an attempt to blend those two together, but they don't blend together really well. It's not a great position for Venus if you want to understand Venus as Venus is, unless you like it floating in the water.
Ophelia.
Yeah.
No, sorry. That wasn't fun.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was only about 75 minutes. We sneaked in a short one here. All of that.
But
work.
full. Finally.
Sure, I hold my tongue.